Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's PrideFest session on the Bi experience. I'm Scott, Social Impact Manager here at Dense Regions Network, and it'll be my pleasure to introduce you to our panel very shortly. So lockdown has impacted Pride events across the country. So festivities like this are essential because they will be all virtual. While visibility, acceptance, and rights have come leaps and bounds in recent years across the full spectrum of LGBTQ+, there's usually one letter that gets a bit left behind, the B. We want to change this. So today we'll be talking about how Dan and the industry can do more in this space. What are some of the challenges that bisexuals face in everyday life? And how can we ensure more visibility and authentic understanding in society? So today we're bringing together leaders, change makers, and pioneers from across our business and industry who are genuinely shifting the dial when it comes to driving diversity and inclusion, intersectionality, and belonging. So, just to put a bit of things into perspective, only 66% of Gen Z identify as exclusively heterosexual, a large shift from the baby boomer generation of usually about 88%. In the Ipsos Mori panel. We know that Dentsu is doing well in some areas, but there's always going to be opportunity for improvement. Thanks to the real huge efforts of our community, we came 59th in Stonewall's top 100 employers list, which we're really proud of. This is over about 50 companies entering, and we are the first marketing services company to make it in this top 100. So the Stonewall ranking, if you're not aware, is making sure that the company environment is as inclusive and a healthy, safe place to be for the community. So over the next 45 minutes, you'll get to hear what our panel thinks and what you can do to support inclusion, particularly through the lens of bisexuality, which is actually the largest group in our community, and yet often quite invisible. So before we get started, just a few bits of housekeeping. We will be sharing the full recording immediately afterwards on our YouTube. This is a live Q&A, so please pop into the chat bar any questions you have for our guests, and we'll try and answer as many as possible. There may be some challenging or triggering conversations that might come up. If you are a Dan employee, just know that you have access to the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. Otherwise, we have NABS resources or the Wellbeing Community. If you're not a Dan employee, you also have access to great resources from charities like Calm, Campaign Against Living Miserably, or Mind, or any resources. So also, we'll be dropping some of those in the chat later on as well. So please do get involved. And let me hand over to our wonderful guests to introduce ourselves. Can you please share who you are, a bit about your background, how you identify, and if you have any preferred pronouns? Chloe, please kick us off.
Knew you were going to ask me first. Hi everyone, and everyone watching on live stream on YouTube. My name is Chloe Davies. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as bisexual, cisgender female. I am head of PR and partnerships for my G-Work, the online business community for LGBT students, graduates, business professionals, and all those who believe in true workplace equality. That's my day job. My gay job, or I guess my volunteer life, I'm Strategic Officer for UK Black Pride and the Community Lead for the London Queer Fashion Show.
Next. Yep, I like day job and gay job. I think that's really good. My day job is I work in Dentsu with Dentsu Data Labs. I'm also a member of the I'm Proud Steer Committee. I've been a proud member for I think a couple of years now. Pronouns are he, him, identify as bisexual, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all your thoughts and having a discussion about this topic. I think it's really important.
Lucy?
Hi, I am Lucy McKillop. I identify as a bisexual woman. My pronouns are she, her. Professionally, I work for out-of-home media company Clear Channel. I head up their brand marketing. And then my gay job, to use the same term as Chloe, because I love it, is as advertising. So I'm advertising's co-comms director. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. And advertising are the advertising community's LGBT advocacy group. and we've been going for about a year and a half now. Yeah. In my personal life, I'm a mum and I'm married to a man, and we live in Tooting.
All right, Rich.
Yeah, hi, I'm Richard Miles. I kind of turned my day job into a gay job, as you were. I run the Diversity Standards Collective, and we are a kind of a hybrid consultancy, research and creative agency that helps any brand, publisher or agency speak to and reach diversity authentically. I identify as a gay cisgendered man, and my pronouns are he, him.
Cool. And just to close out, so as you know, I'm Scott, and cisgendered, and identify as fluid. So he, him pronouns, and great to have you all. So let's set the stage. Maybe just hand over to Andrew to start us off. So what is the current state of the bi experience as you see it?
Yeah, so to me, I think it's very much a work in progress. I feel like certainly, you know, panels like this are an example where there's been a big push recently from companies and within the LGBT community itself to kind of bring bisexuality to the fore. We've often say, you know, there's a bit of an invisibility, a bit of erasure around bisexuality, and I think we're seeing a bit of a positive change in the right direction on that. Saying that, I think sort of general day-to-day life, I think I've heard probably every negative perception or stereotype of bisexual people. So common ones are you are hard to find it to be, sorry, it's hard for you to be monogamous in a relationship, loyalty issues, you're confused, you know, you're just bi now, gay later. And another common question I get is, what percentage gay am I, or straight? Which is impossible to define. And I think this kind of comes through, you know, it's ingrained in us even as children that we have this very binary view of the world. So, you know, you're male or female, you're gay or straight. And bisexuality is something that sort of questions that and makes people think a bit differently about sort of their approach to sexuality and gender in general. So that's obviously true of trans people, non-binary people as well. So I think there's a lot of issues with the binary view of the world. The other problem I had, and it was sort of exemplified when I was researching just for this panel, is the way bisexuality is researched is a little problematic. So the lesbian, gay and bisexual experience are often amalgamated together. And obviously we know that they're all very, very different. So when I wrote in bisexual representation in advertising, 10 or 20 results on the top of the list were lesbian, gay and bisexual representation. So I couldn't even find the sort of bisexual nuances in that. And the danger of that is if you're thinking about measuring success and whether the needle's moving in a positive direction, if you're grouping up all those three different groups that are very different, you could say positive change has been made, but actually it's just for lesbian and gay people, for example. And the barriers for bisexuals are obviously very different. Yeah, obviously if anyone else has any thoughts on that, do chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing the research for the Binormal project. I mean, it came apparent to me because for the last 5 years, I've done a lot of work in the LGBT space. And as I was doing that, you kind of find that you're heroing a lot of the time, especially get the gay community and lesbian community. And obviously now they kind of go in trends, it feels like, you know, gay girls are really trendy, then lesbians, now everyone's talking about the trans community. And I think having people around me like Lucy, who's on this call, and friend Ant and you, Andrew, and other people, you kind of dawns on you that who's representing you and that B is skipped. And I think now that the trans community are, you know, it's not massive, but they're getting a bit more of a voice, which is great. It's now more, you realize more than ever that B's been dipped out, because if you ask people, you know, name me one advert that features a bisexual person, people are stumped.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to say, actually, from Scott's introduction, the stat that you said about the B being the biggest percentage, I was genuinely shocked, because, as you say, the representation of the B is so much smaller. You know, and actually in the workplace, my experience is that, you know, I'm much more aware of out women and out men as lesbians and gay men, but much fewer people I know are bisexual. And I know that I'm not meant to really quote kind of just my experience, but it feels very much like we're all used to seeing kind of the gay experience and the lesbian experience in advertising, in kind of film, text, but the bi experience, as you say, is kind of slightly more subject to kind of stereotyping almost.
I think
Sorry, Rich.
I was go on.
I was going to say it's like Andrew was saying, that when we do see ourselves utilising the mainstream, it is that stereotype of if there is a bisexual character, it's usually a woman, and it's a cheating saga. It's never actually a very fair representation of what a bisexual relationship is. But I think it's also coming back to the evolution and language around bisexuality, and I guess we talked about this in the briefing, but bi traditionally being that it is someone who has the capacity to be romantically, emotionally, or sexually attracted to someone who is male or female, and now understanding that bisexual is an umbrella term, and it means someone is all of those things but the capacity for more than one gender, because actually as we talk around people and we talk about how people view themselves and identify themselves, this is the least binary that it can get, and so you have to understand that those conversations around bisexuality and bisexual identity, and then what we see, and like everyone was saying, if we don't see it, it's always been there, but it has to be part of the conversation and the dialogue, instead of it just being kind of the lesbian and gay anthems. You see the top 20 LGBTQ plus heroes, and you're struggling to find anyone that's bi, but you can definitely find someone that's lesbian, gay, or or from the trans community, or you end up just having the token bisexual advocate, when we know that there are so many more, because within the bisexual community ourselves, we're talking about them, we see them, and so we want them to be present everywhere else.
That segues nicely into a question I have, but also something that I saw come up in the chat, is the bi-representation in media. So we have the privilege to work in the media and advertising space. Can anyone share, maybe Rich, with your work on the Bi-Normal project, any sort of good representation of bisexuality in media? Maybe where have brands gone wrong, and maybe any ideas you have of like how to get it right?
Yeah, I mean, it's few and it's basically non-existent. For advertising, which I'm part of, as well as Lucy and a few others, I was part of their creative review every year. And every year we review like the top 15 or the most heard about advertisements from that last year, and discuss them, and we'd have representation from all different parts of the LGBT community and allies. And after 3 or 4 years, it became really apparent that not one bi ad had come through our doors. We hadn't seen one. And I could point out 2. There was an H&M advert that was done by Baz Luhrmann, and obviously there's the new Renault ad, but they're bi because the community kind of put themselves upon that. In the media, they've talked about them as lesbian and gay adverts. Theoretically, you could say the Renault ad features a woman who's married to a man, and then she leaves the man and ends up with a woman that she's loved since she's a child. Now, I think a lot of people would maybe relate to that who are part of the bi community. But by calling her a lesbian in the media, what you're kind of do is lending yourself to that sort of bi erasure, to say she thought she was straight and now she's a lesbian, rather than actually just allowing her to have been, actually she did love the guy, she had 2 kids with him, she was definitely bi, and now she's with a woman that now all this is over. Do you know what I mean? There's this sort of not talking about it. So when we say the good, there is some good out there if we were willing to talk about it, but we're not. So theoretically, there's no good out there. There's just kind of negative and erasure out there at the moment.
Well, on the Renault ad that you're talking about, I remember you and me talking about this previously and saying, is it a lesbian relationship or is it a bi relationship? And taking it to a wider group, and the group being really quite split. There was a real group of people going, no, it's very obviously a lesbian relationship. Look at the story arc. They've been in love the whole time. That the male relationship is just a mistake. You can see she's unhappy. Yeah. But you know, that therein lies the problem. You know, therein like it's like that kind of like denial that there could be the kind of the shift away from that path of nope, she's a lesbian. So it's just really interesting that you know, even within kind of the LGBT community, and probably completely not on purpose, people are kind of very like, nope, that's it. It can't possibly be bi.
Yeah, I mean, just to give people a basis of what the Bi-Normal project is, I launched that with a number of other people from within the advertising and marketing industry who identify as bi or allies, and it's basically a project that joins the industry together to help. We're looking for a brand basically to help us create the first and authentic advert that features or focuses on somebody who's from the bisexual community. Now, it's taken a while to get off the ground because of lots of different things, but when that Renault ad came out, why Lucy and I were talking about it, because we were like, oh shit, a bi ad's out there. There's a bi ad. Someone's done it finally. And then you look, and actually no one's calling it a bi ad. So it's, you know, theoretically to everyday people who aren't within the community or speaking about it, they don't see it as a bisexual advert. So actually representation isn't there. And that's because when we launched it and I put it on social media, nobody believes bisexual people are real. Like, that's the most bizarre thing. It's like they're Smurfs. You know, people would say, oh, they're, you know, bi now, gay later, as Andrew kind of said earlier. And or the advertising people would say, oh, it's too hard to fit in that explanation of you like one person or another in 30 seconds. And I'm a bit like, well, we can explain complicated banking terms in 30 seconds. We have had brands like Twix make a differentiation between a left and a right Twix, and there's no difference. We've got ones that lends itself, like we were talking about, like Hovis, best of both, or Cadbury's, how do you eat yours? I know that's a bit it's on the nose, but there's that we could easily, like, we are a skillful bunch of people. Like, if we can't make an ad that emulates what it's like to have a bi experience, but we can do everything else that's overly complicated, it just feels like there's no effort being made because people don't want to do it, and because people don't believe it's there, or there's a problem, which is even more kind of distressing.
Yeah, there's something I want to add, and Rich hasn't slipped me 50 quid to say this, but what the Diversity Standards Collective does is, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, you do have a focus group of people, 50 plus, quite a representative number of people. And it doesn't have to just be to do with bisexuality. It could be trans, it could be to do with neurodiversity or something like that. So if you're at the strategic stage or you're making creative, sense checking it is just one thing that's really easy to do. And the way the H&M ad was received was quite negative in the bi community and in the LGBT community. And that could have been avoided if they just done an hour focus group and just sense checked it with people. So that's one thing I think is a really important way to just try and make improvements going forward. I was originally going to say I was sympathetic to the fact that it's hard to tell a sort of sympathetic bisexual story in 30 seconds, but now with your examples, maybe I don't agree with that anymore.
And anyone that works on those brands, you heard it. So there's their opportunity.
I think it's also a little bit deeper than that it is structural in society. Look, I'm about to be really deep, but you know, even if we just go back to real time, so beginning of this year, and the two women who were assaulted on the bus, one of them's actually bisexual, and yet the media, journalists, despite her saying that she said she was bisexual, it was more palatable for her to be portrayed as a lesbian. It was easier for people the media felt, to resonate with her story if she was a lesbian. And sometimes many of the discussions that I have with other bisexual people is, do we think this is because within bisexual and bisexual identity, the word sex is the part that people get too hung up on? And think that actually identity is around the sexual part, not understanding that this is who you are 365 days a year, it doesn't change. And so I think that is always, that the media always has such a big part kind of in how we tell stories in that news telling. And if we're not there and we're not present, even when we are, it's so problematic. I think that we kind of need to go all the way back to that part and really push that alongside advertising. And that's, you know, what, like we said, why initiatives are so important. You know, I'm also connected to advertising because I did an interview with the team a couple of months ago, and just talking about all these things that you said, that visibility. You know, I didn't claim my children at the beginning of this session. I have 2 sons, but yeah, you know, it's being a bi woman and their dad is bi. So, you know, having 2 sons that actually were a bit of a unicorn within the bisexual community, and just utilizing that existence, that it does actually exist, and it isn't, you know, out of that I'm greedy or I haven't made my mind up or that I can't decide. This is just who we are.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. And fundamentally, when we come to terms and phrases like love is love, that's really all it boils down to. Is some people have very strong identities, so they want to have you know, a terminology that really sits well with them. And other people are just like, I love who I love. Let's just leave it there. And you know, both are completely valid. There are some really interesting questions coming up in the chat bar. So if you don't mind, I'll just sort of divert to those before we go on. So this is just around some of the terms we're using. So asking, would bi be preferred to being gender fluid? As I understand it, they're quite different. Would anyone like to chime in on sort of the difference there?
I feel like Chloe is.
Yeah, I was waiting for her to speak.
No, because bisexual, or if I give just my own personal opinion, bisexual is attached more to binary and gender, and that it is the capacity to be in love with more than one gender, whereas gender fluid is you do not see gender, you do not see many of the labels that are within the LGBTQ plus spectrum and identities. So and not want to be assigned to, you are a lesbian because you are just sleeping with women, because that also includes trans women who might identify as trans. So it you know, with gender fluid, it is all encompassing, whereas at least if I use myself as example, my bisexuality more usually is defined to being in love with a man or in love with a woman, but inclusive within that umbrella. I have dated trans women, trans men, non-binary. So yeah, I think just as identity evolves, that's where I would see the separation. Bi is more binary, gender fluid is fluid of all identities and not gender specific.
Love it. And, you know, thanks for asking the question, just because that's a great platform for us to continue on from. Another interesting one for, you know, as those who work in media, we're talking about some of the campaigns that go out, but what about channels? So are some media channels better than others to present to the bi community?
I've always thought TV is a very good place to have a sort of, yeah, a nice representation of bisexuals, to show monogamous relationships are possible, to have a good story, a depth of character, to have that visibility. Growing up, I don't think I remember seeing anybody bisexual on TV, but now you have the likes of Rosa in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, really, really well-written character, really strong character. And you know, it might sound silly, my husband at the moment's making me watch the Avatar Legend of Korra, and in that, the lead protagonist, and this is aimed at kids, lead protagonist starts off interested in men, dating a man, and then towards the end of the series ends up dating a woman. And it's not spoken about in any kind of negative way, it's just really normalizing it, and to think that children can see that and have it normalized from such a young age is really important. I know that's not specifically to do with advertising, but I think that kind of representation in the media and on TV is one really important one for me.
Yeah, I mean, representation can go across any media. I mean, that's the point of any of us, that we work across specific medias. You know, Lucy's out of home. I'm potentially, but you know, whatever we have the capital to work from, we have the influence to change how people are represented in those sets of communications. So I don't know if there's anything better. There's just some things that may be easier, and there's some things that are a little bit maybe more difficult because they're more written word than visual. But like, you know, again, it just comes down to us working out how to explain it. And I don't think people previously have put the effort in to look into it.
Yeah. I mean, here's my moment to kind of pitch out of home. I think you know, I think Rich is right. I think there are some mediums that lend themselves better to kind of like instant storytelling. So absolutely, TV advertising gives you that kind of like couple of minutes to really get that kind of buy story across, hopefully at some point. But equally, you know, if you did use a medium like out of home really well, it is as good at storytelling. It's out there in the public space. It's also kind of great when people want to kind of get that moment of fame. So at the moment we're running the Pride Inside campaign on our screens, and we're getting quite a lot of people taking pictures of themselves being like, oh my God, this is amazing. And you know, out of home is also really good at that amplification piece. So if it were to be used, you know, there are kind of multiple examples of campaigns that have had huge viral hits because they've used out of home as their kind of like PRable piece, and it's so visual. So I mean, you know, yeah, there are lots of mediums, but maybe give out of home a shot.
Another question popped up around terminology, asking if the panel, how the panel feel on the use of the term queer as opposed to specific things like gay or bisexual or lesbian. I know we discussed this before, so I'm just going to hand it over to you straight away.
Me again. So when we are talking about the identity queer, also giving that first layer of sensitivity that for the older LGBTQ plus generation, it's a term that still causes a lot of pain. So we know that there's still some work to do around utilizing that identity. But for younger generation, and a lot of LGBTQ plus people, they feel that they don't want to be identified under any other term or identity within the spectrum, that queer means that you don't really have to ask or answer a lot of not be asked or have to answer a lot of questions around identity. They can just say that they're queer and that's it, versus, you know, like we're talking about here within the bisexual umbrella, actually how bi are you, or, you know, what does your trans identity under the trans umbrella. So queer is a loving without label term or identity within the community that much more people want to be identified and recognized as, and definitely within the younger community, you know, our youth are, that's it for them. You know, they don't want to identify in any other means, simply because they're also still just working it out.
And I think that's the beautiful thing, is just allowing people space to explore that and realizing that that's their journey. Yeah, really powerful. Thank you. So one of the things that we're working on at Dentsu is being really conscious of intersectionality. So all of our employee networks work together. So across the Parents and Carers network, the you know, this network, the And Proud network, our BAME, our multicultural network, as well as our mental health and well-being network. So Chloe, could you talk a bit about maybe the intersectionality piece and how that plays into your experience, how your intersecting identities impact on your life?
Yeah, so the, you know, when we're talking about intersectionality, and remember that this isn't a new buzzword for diversity. So intersectionality are the barriers of oppression that stop you from bringing your entire identity into a situation. So I cannot separate that I am a woman from being someone who's Black, to also someone who is a mental health survivor, was born into a, you know, a lower working class, even if that has changed over time, and then is a parent as well. All of the identities that I bring that intersect in different places in my life, but that can all be discriminated against, that is intersectionality in a nutshell. So I want to be able to bring my entire self into a job that I do. I want to, if I come and work somewhere, be present in an LGBTQ plus network, but also in a women's network. I'd love there to be a well-being and mindfulness network, and that there is parenting network. That you know, it's not LGBT parenting or the race network, but these are all the different parts of my identity that I want to bring to the table and involve in a business. So you cannot be a truly inclusive organization if you are not looking at things from an intersectional lens. So you need to be thinking about like you're saying at Dentsu, what are you doing with your race network alongside your LGBT network? How are they all then speaking to each other with your well-being network? What is your neurodiversity? Because you can be Black, LGBTQ plus, a woman, and still then tap into the neurodiversity. So it's how these are all working together, and that the amplification of the voices where they intersect is in the mainstream within the culture of your organization. So yes. Intersectionality, not diversity. So it's I guess in the work that we do, a lot of the time where things that get messy is because they travel without context. So this is a term that's very much coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw in the US. And what's happened is, as it has moved throughout society, sometimes it's moved without the context of what the true definition was and how it would then be applied. We can give the same example when we talk about the More Colour, More Pride flag, which was the introduction, I can't speak today, of the black and brown stripes on the flag. And the reason this was done is because in the city of Philadelphia, they are 42% Black. So not BAME, just Black community. And within the LGBT community, they had a serious issue with racism. So it was created as a sign of solidarity. And then as it traveled around the world, what you saw was that context was removed. And so it created this furor of our flag has always been representative and inclusive. And that's actually not what was said or what happened. It was that this was created to give a part of the community that was so desperate to be seen a voice. Just like we continue to have flags, we have our own flag for the bisexual community. There's a pan flag, there's a trans flag, there is there is a Jewish flag within the Pride flag. There are so many different flags, because for the more marginalized parts of our community where they didn't see themselves, this visual representation was created. So for a lot of these conversations that we are continuing to have now, even when we're talking about the queer identity, it's just making sure we apply the correct context, so that in our education, we really are educating and not jumping on the bandwagon, because sometimes that's quite irresponsible. And then we spend the time unpicking the good work that we could do, and especially in the line of work that you all do, that intersectional approach, when you're really thinking about something and taking the time, is so necessary and so valid, versus someone going, oh yeah, but you need more Black people, or you need more bi people, and you're like, no, we want to do this correctly, that is representative of society now, and that takes a very intersectional approach.
I kind of just want to pause and absorb that so much. Yeah, so powerful. Lucy, Rich, Andrew, any adds?
I was going to add, fantastic what Chloe said, absolutely true. Really, really important, really interesting. I guess a lot of us are being asked at the moment to think about where we see we have privilege. So I would, as a white man, a white cisgender man, I definitely feel like I have a lot of privilege. There's aspects of my life that I don't never have to think about. So I don't have to think about walking down the street generally, someone looking at me in a different way, going for a job interview, being at work. Generally, there's not sort of anything going on there, interacting with the police, that kind of thing. So there is obviously a great deal of privilege afforded by that. So yeah, people are rightly thinking, what can we do to try and level the playing field, that people aren't being treated equally? And that's just the big thing that everyone is asking at the moment. Can we just all be treated equally? Yeah, so thinking about the kind of sphere of influence you have, I was trying to think about ways to kind of make it a bit more tangible and realistic, because you can't change the world overnight on your own. So what can you influence, and also what is the capacity you have to influence? So Chloe's mentioned mental health. If you're struggling and having a hard day, and then you're asked to go on a panel and speak about issues to do with race, issues to do with gender, you might not have the ability to do that and then do your job the next day, then look after your kids. So you have to look after yourself first. And then what can you influence? So, for me, in the I'm Proud Steerco, we've always made sure that panels such as this are diverse. You can't just have 5 white men talking about how it is to be bisexual, because that's not the reality of it. So kind of a more inclusive approach to that kind of thing. What else do I have here? We have our interviews, our 5 minutes with, our innovation downloads, so you can get voices heard that aren't necessarily being heard at the moment. And then one of the crucial things, I think, is steer committees and things like that represent LGBT plus committees like I'm Proud. You have a direct line of communication with senior leadership. So you can directly influence quite large things like HR policy. And I believe recently in the last couple of years, we've changed our trans inclusion policy so people in that community can feel more welcome, more included in the business as a whole. So you can actually make quite big differences. But, you know, first and foremost, even if it's a small thing, if it's reading, listening to a podcast, watching some videos, that's something, and you should be proud of doing that. Donating to charities if you can do it. But everything's going to help to make a more inclusive world.
I appreciate that, Andrew. I was like, okay, so no, I'm not going to say that bit because Andrew said it. But no, you know, it's the reality is we all have privilege, you know. It's just for some of us, it's at passing times. So I have privilege. I'm a privileged Black woman, but at passing times, you know, as Andrew just illustrated, some of those situations are my everyday lived experience. But I think especially at the time we're in now, you know, where the global pandemic we're into, you know, where we are looking at the, you know, atrocities that are happening to specifically the Black community, and that is inclusive of Black LGBTQ plus people, and especially Black trans people. It's natural to want to ask, what more can you do when we're all being asked to self-reflect? This is a time of self-reflection for everyone. And so like we said, the first step, I keep saying it, sounds really silly, Google is your friend. My favorite place at the moment is Instagram, because however you like to learn, whether you are like me with my library in the background that I hope to have one day, that you like to read, so you know, the lists of books or the infographics or people that are sharing videos and interviews and talking about how to recognize privilege, but also what more you can do for the Black community at this time, and in specific to the LGBTQ plus part of the Black community. There is so much information and a wealth of resource. There are so many different places and charities that you can donate your time, but also if you have the means to donate your money. Because like Andrew said, you know, I won't lie, we're exhausted, you know, I'm exhausted. I love Pride. I love Pride Month. You know, this is usually the busiest time of the year for me in so many different aspects, but so enriching. And we're in lockdown, so that has already had its implications on my mental health. And then we're now, you know, my life and the life of other people that look like me is being played out every single day. And the trauma of that, even if it's just being mindful about how you share knowledge. You know, we don't want to see as Black and brown people the trauma of Black and brown bodies without a trigger warning. And that's really, really simple. When you share something, just put a trigger warning beforehand so someone has the choice of whether they choose to look at it and not are accidentally seeing it and then have to deal with the impact. Check in on your Black colleagues. You know, we don't really know how to rest as Black people, and we're not necessarily very good at asking, or at least I know I'm not at asking for help. So go and check in, ask how they're doing. When they tell you they're fine, go back and ask them how they're doing. You know, so in the same way that we ask as LGBTQ plus people, and that be our leading identity, for our heteronormative straight allies to show up for us, this isn't any different. We're asking as allies to each other for everyone to show up for each other. And I think what has been the most beautiful thing out of this whole situation for me is the way in which people are holding other people to account. It's the way in which I'm not going to thank you, and I'm not going to pat you on the back for doing what we should all do for each other and what I would necessarily do. But I appreciate that, Andrew, I haven't had to speak it myself. Like you've just said, these are all the things that you can do for Black people at this time, and that you know it, and you're speaking truth to power, and you're consistently doing it. It's all of these things that we would do for individual parts of the community that we're now asking you to do for collectives. Because like I said, it is that intersectional approach that you cannot talk about the Black community without talking about Black LGBTQ plus people. And underneath that umbrella is a vast community of people. So yeah, that's my take.
Once again, I always just want to pause and honor, you know, everything there, as opposed to jumping ahead.
I'm just me.
I think it's, you know, it's important, you know, before we launch into any other topics, and you know, there's been so many comments that I'm just reading in the chat bar, just saying, you know, thank you for your honesty. This is absolutely necessary. So glad this is coming to the forefront. I always sometimes just have a little bit of a shake before I go to the next topic, just sort of let your body process it, because trauma, collective trauma is stored in the body. So we need to listen. We need to listen to our bodies just as much as our minds. Lucy, I know we were talking a bit about the effects of the pandemic on mental health and self-care. Can you share your thoughts on this area as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like Andrew and Chloe have both kind of shared a bit around that as well. And I think you mentioned a few kind of resources at the beginning in your introduction. But yeah, I mean, it's been real, hasn't it? Like, it's a really interesting one. So I have mental health issues. I have anxiety and depression. I also am neurologically diverse, so I have ADD. There, I kind of intersect in different ways. And my experience in lockdown, because I struggle to hold like facts because of my neurological makeup. So I tend to talk from a personal experience point of view. So forgive me if that's where I'm coming from right now. But yeah, it's been really, really up and down. I'm not gonna lie. Like yesterday, I was a horrible person to be around, really emotional. And that's like the first time in about 3 weeks that I'd felt like that. So it's kind of interesting to kind of think about where that came from. For a while, I was really enjoying it. And I felt really guilty because I was like, I'm usually hurtling through my existence, up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to yoga, go to work, either get home to pick up my son with 2 minutes to spare, make dinner, read some emails, do all of this stuff. But suddenly everything stopped and I went, oh. But then there's the guilt attached to that because we're going through a pandemic and there's so much kind of awful stuff going on. And you kind of have to process these things and kind of feel, yeah, just it's been real kind of corona coaster. We've all heard that word. And I think that, yeah, you just kind of have to do what you can. So I took up cycling mainly because I have a huge fear of getting back on the tube. So I'm like, if I am going to have to get back into work at some point, then I need to find another way to get into work. I've been trying to do a bit of yoga. Rich and I did a streamed yoga class together, which was fun. There are lots of resources that I've been turning to. I think Chloe made a great point earlier about using Instagram not only as a kind of source of inspiration, but a kind of knowledge hub. So I have always really liked an account called The Mind Geek, and she's a psychotherapist, I think. Can't remember if that's the right word, but yes, she's essentially a trained psychotherapist, and she talks about lots of different kind of behaviors and breaks them down in a really kind of bite-sized way to kind of understand where certain behaviors and patterns come from. Working for advertising, you kind of, I mean, everyone shares so much around kind of mental health and resource, especially for the LGBT community. And I was lucky enough to take part in the mental health advertising podcast episode. And one of our members called La Kinsbit, who works for Tate, she also took, misgendering, they also took part in it, and talked about a resource called ELOP, which is a counselling for trans and non-binary individuals up in Walthamstow. So there are loads and loads of resources out there, and I think it's just about, also NABS is an obvious one. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts about mental health and surviving lockdown. I don't know if anyone else wants to chip in.
It's funny that you
just quickly, I really appreciate what you did, and I think just to call out, sometimes we will make mistakes, we will accidentally misgender someone.
Do you know, When La and I appeared on the podcast together, it was the first time that I had actually spent time speaking to someone who used they them pronouns. So I apologized in advance to say if I get it wrong, and I feel dreadful having done that there. So yeah, you know, another apology from me.
But in the same way that, you know, we're all doing our part to learn more about the privilege that we have in the world, to learn more about the things that we're ignorant of, the things that we don't know. Right. And so acknowledging that mistakes will happen, and we just gotta keep going on, because we can't you know, lean back from those. We have to just smash through them. But yeah, please take.
No, it's like you're saying, it's owning it when it happens, you know, owning it when it happens, and when it's genuine and it's not meant with malice, which we can all see, like it's acknowledging it and then kind of lending to, and that will kind of be a learn. We all do it. We all, you know, speak truth to power accidentally. You know, I did it on a call earlier and I was mortified, absolutely mortified. But you know, it sometimes it happens. But when you said about surviving, so I class myself as a mental health survivor. It lives with me. I do not live with it. And you know, in this time, and I guess, sorry to everybody else that's on the session, but I think this is going to, like, Lucy and I can talk around this, and obviously Rich with you too. When you have kids in the middle of a global pandemic, and you're LGBT, and then I'm not even going to talk about being Black as well. Like, we were already tired. We were already, you know, trying to do the day-to-day, do the work, you know, keep a home as well. But you know, those rules have gone out of the window of, you know, how tidy the house has got to be. But all of these have an impact, and all of these play on. And I went back to work on Monday. I was back in the office for the very first time. I've been in lockdown. This is week 16. And I won't lie, for someone who has never struggled with anxiety, that's not how my mental health works. Mine has been more depression. Having anxiety live with me in a way that is just because of this pandemic. And I had a panic attack. I had a full-blown panic attack, thinking about leaving the house. Was it in the air? You know, what am I going to do? Like you, I don't want to go on public transport. I got a car to work, and I live in Hertfordshire, so it wasn't cheap. But these are all these things that you're thinking about in, like, how do I now navigate and usualize my life again? Like, what does life look like? You know, I've got therapy at 5 o'clock this afternoon. My therapist is not going to be happy with me because I haven't done what she asked me to do. But I'm just like, that's okay. Like, I'm just going to show up. I'm going to be present. You know, we have to talk about it. Like, we can't not keep saying it is okay to not be okay, because I am not okay. Despite me smiling, you know, I know that I'm struggling, and I know that the current world climate is compounding that, and I just need to, where I can, try and talk about it. You know, there are, like you said, some great resources. ELOP is an amazing one. You said Mind Out, which is, you know, the charity for LGBTQ plus people based in Brighton. You have on Instagram a great one, so Our Next Therapy. They are trying to support Black women for therapy. Black Minds Matter. So there are now a lot more initiatives, because I know, you know, I'm someone who my mental health journey really started when I was 24, and I had a full physical mental breakdown. And the job that I was working for were amazing, and they helped me with counselling, and so that's when my journey started. And so the majority of my therapists, counsellors, have ended up being white, simply because that was the community that it more widely specialised. And trying to find a Black therapist is incredibly difficult. Trying to find a Black LGBTQ plus therapist is like gold dust. And when you do find one, because they're not so readily available, you're worried, do they also serve your friends? Because everyone is like, the therapist is sacred. So it took me 18 months to find my therapist. And even now my friends are like, who's your therapist? And I'm like, I'm not telling you. You have to go and find your own. Not because I don't want you to get help, but she's mine. And you know, you get really protective about your therapist, because you know that you need the help. And so you know, we have to keep talking about these things, because, you know, traditionally from the Black community, regardless of how you identify, many of the barriers that you're facing are cultural. You know, my parents are African American, and so we don't talk about things outside. Like, you know, I say, you know, I divorced myself from my parents for a while. We actually separated and moved out because my dad always used to say to me, why can't you speak to me? Why do you have to go and speak to a stranger? And I was like, part of the reason is you. And we can't talk about this on a day. I need someone who's objective to separate. But also, if you help me, how am I going to learn to help myself? And so you have to talk about all of that and all of that in readiness, just to explain the vastness of mental health, because my mental health journey is entirely different to yours, Lucy. But we still have mental health journeys. So unless we're talking about it, but also that it's not a negative, like it's not a bad thing, because I think at the moment it was 1 in 4, but if it's not 1 in 2 people in the world at the moment are suffering from a mental health issue, if not all of us at some point, because of the circumstances that we're in now in the world, you can't not talk about it.
Absolutely. And I think that there's real power in taking ownership of the fact that, you know, we do have these journeys and we do have these ups and downs, and the days that are, you know, worse, and days, weeks, months that are worse than others. But I think that the danger for me is when I try and deny it, and I'm trying to, oh no, I'm absolutely fine. No, everything's great. Yeah. No. And then I haven't spoken to my friends or my family for like 3-4 weeks, and I start getting the texts and they're like, you okay? And I'm like, yeah. But they know that it's when you go dark that's like, that's I call it
the ostrich effect.
Oh yeah.
Like, head down, you know, or I've been saying to my friends, like, how are you? And I'm like, next question, please.
Yeah.
But my friends and I, we have a code, and I think it is very much around, you know, your chosen family and the people that you have around you, that my really close friends, they know me well enough now that those days where I start to get silent, they get really annoying and very persistent. And they're like, hi Chloe. Hi Chloe, because I think because we've been there in that journey, and I'm finding that sense of community around when you do start talking about it, at least for me, has been so beneficial, because I can do it for everybody else, absolutely. When I have to do it for myself, like, everyone keeps asking, what are you doing to apply self-care at the moment? And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Yeah. What is that?
Eating biscuits.
Or, you know, how are you getting time away from your kids? And I'm going through my Lush bath bombs as quickly as I possibly could, but sometimes it's really hard to just stop. And, you know, I'm actually having to tell myself I have to, because if I don't, I'm going to burn out and I'm going to be useless to everybody. And so, you know, I'm saying that to myself right now in the camera.
Yeah.
Because I keep saying today that I'm not okay, but it's hard, you know. It's really hard, and sometimes you do need other people, like my therapist. Can you tell I'm a bit scared? Like my therapist, to kind of just say, okay, I'm not doing this because I'm trying to force you, but what I'm trying to do is to just help you. And even if it's just watching other people talking about it might help you, you know, that's why we have to do it, because, you know, otherwise what good are we to each other if we can't be more human?
Completely.
When we can't bring all of what we are experiencing and all of who we are to any relationships, but particularly at work, it's exhausting. We were talking earlier about sort of this emotional cost of what's called covering. Yeah. So you don't feel like you can talk about your sexuality or your mental health or whatever aspect, whatever you might be experiencing. If you don't feel that you can bring that to work in a non-judgmental and it's okay to not be okay and it's okay because it just is way, that's the mask that you have to keep layering on. Would anyone like to comment on this emotional cost, or what does covering mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I can say something. I mean, it's interesting because for me, covering sometimes coincides with privilege, because as a white gay man, the privilege is so apparent sometimes. So I can walk into a room, and people always say, and I say in conversations, how if I dial up my campness or dial it down, and I can walk into a room and you can feel the privilege you have, you've got respect, you've got that. And sometimes burning in the back of my mind is that I know when the conversation goes forward, I know that at some point I'm gonna have to come out to these people in this very room, because as LGBT people, you know, I have to come out to everybody on a daily basis. So I can see the wall of privilege in a way of being, in their eyes, a white straight man, and you're always in fear about when that moment that you'll say, or, you know, I've got a boyfriend, or whatever you say, you know that's going to come out, and you know that the room, you believe that the room's going to change. So a lot of, you know, you either decide you're not going to do that, and then in a way, for me, covering is like I'm sitting there faking who I am, even though the conversations may have never arose, and they may not care, but I'm still not fully putting myself forward, because I believe that it might be detrimental to what I do, because I've been into rooms where I've used my privilege as a white guy to get what I want for the LGBT community. I haven't put forward that I'm part of the LGBT community, but I've done the agenda that I need to do, gone in, gone out. And, you know, maybe it wouldn't have mattered if I had or hadn't have done, but I knew where that privilege lied, so I used it. But I also can't not be who I am, or talk about who I am, and I would never lie. But I don't know, it's like, all I can describe it as we're talking about roller coasters today, is it's that bit when you're right at the top, and you get to a point where you know it's going to come out in conversations leading that road, the person next to you says, oh, my kids are at home, and I've mentioned the fact that I've got a daughter, and everyone's like, oh, great, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody says, oh, you know, does mum work as well? And then you're like, oh, no, I've got to come out, you know? So, or just let people think that I'm married to a straight woman and we have a lovely relationship, you know? But yeah, it's quite taxing.
So my question to you, I guess, is this thought around privilege versus responsibility. Mm-hmm. So I think so I've only really properly been comfortable talking about being bi because I am married to a straight man, so it's quite easy for me to pass as a straight woman. In the last sort of 3-4 years, I mean, it's always been there, but I was part of this kind of group that thought, oh well, once you get to a certain point, you know, that's once you have your long-term relationship, that's what you are. But obviously it's not the case. It's always been anyway. So, like, is it my responsibility as a bi person to come out?
I think it's your responsibility to do what you feel is more comfortable for you.
But to support the community, like, you know, and normalize and help bring it forward as a kind of accepted thing. You know, yes, I have the privilege of not needing to do that, but I feel sometimes like it's my responsibility to do it. You know,
just give a quick wave and thanks to Chloe. She's going to drop off, but if you have more time, we can continue chatting. Thank you so much, Chloe.
Absolutely, everyone. Please stay in touch. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, all right, bye. Just to follow your point, Lucy, I think we grow to an age where we are willing to take that responsibility on. Like, if I wanted to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, I'd love to do that. But for me, you know, when I first started, you know, in kind of my career, it was all about, like, you know, your job and getting to where you want to be, and you kind of also you're very malleable at that stage. But it wasn't till about I was like, you know, midweight or above, I thought I got comfortable enough in my own skin to be like, I'm ready to take on other responsibilities now. I'm part of the LGBT community. Let me go out and looking for something where I can help others. I don't think that we have to again feel a burden that, oh, I should be doing this or I shouldn't be doing that. But when you're, you know, there, even if it's when you're 75, you know, when you're ready to take on that responsibility, you will. And whether that's this tiny change you make to being in a doctor's surgery and standing up to somebody and telling them you're bi when they say, you know, or it's going up in front of, you know, we do big jobs in this. We speak to, you know, hundreds of people every day. So it's a different level, but it doesn't undermine just those small changes that happen in everyday life. Well, that's my belief.
No,
I would second that and just say, yeah, you definitely don't have to do anything that you don't want to. You know, I've definitely covered in my professional career, I've definitely not been completely open with people. It's only because I'm married to a man now that I kind of have to, if you talk about relationships and, you know, going on holiday, who are you going with, that kind of thing. But I've definitely felt there's situations where I don't feel comfortable, and there's situations where I do. Talking about the impact it has on work, it definitely makes you a less productive member. You don't feel you're necessarily integrating with everybody socially. You don't really want to go out and talk about, like I say, your dating life and things like that. You want to just kind of hide away a bit. So there's a lot of conversation about authenticity. So be your authentic self at work so that you're as productive and everybody can come together and work as well together as possible. But, like I said earlier, it's about that capacity issue. So if you have a day where you're feeling a lot of anxiety, for example, and then someone says, oh, who are you married to today? Or, what's your sexuality? Like anyone would ask that. You don't have to feel like you have to answer. You don't have to tell anyone. There's always somebody else who's kind of carrying the flag and kind of pushing momentum forward and driving better change. So we all deserve time to kind of step back and have a break. That's what I would say.
And then, as a business and as champions within a business, the better we are at making those conversations in the same way with the mental health ones, just completely normalized, or just, if we're trying to drive belonging, if we're trying to, be a truly welcoming place where people don't have to worry about that idea of coming out and the stress around it, it will be better for it, because people are not going to be using so much of their precious mental energy into worrying about when the conversation will come up and, oh my gosh, but if they say this and they say this, but that will, spark anxiety for any of us, for sure. And I have such compassion for all of you in the ways that you've shared. I join you in being neurodiverse. I join you in being, in being fluid, or part of the bisexual umbrella. But also incredibly privileged in that I am in I am cisgender. I'm also in a heterosexual relationship, monogamous at that. So in many ways, I don't need to, but you're right. It is a choice, and it's a choice that you need to make depending on your own inner resources, because it does start that conversation, and you can feel fear, and that can bring up a lot of triggers of maybe you not being accepted by people when you were younger, be that your family or others in the community. So people don't always go, it might seem like a simple conversation, but there can be this baggage if you're still carrying some of that emotional weight with it. I'm not sure if any of you also have to go, but there was something that we wanted to touch on. So Richie, you shared that you identify as gay, but you're such an advocate of the bi community. So, we talk a lot about allies and, showing up for someone in another group that you might not be part of. So I'd love to hear what you have to share about what motivates you and what inspires you to be there for those that are not of your community.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think because I've had, it was the realization of the capital I kind of had, and for a good few years, I'm still part of advertising, but I spoke about LGBT as a whole. Gradually, I realized that there's a lot of loud voices talking for gay men, and there's not for, say, I'm quite outspoken for the trans community, for the Black community, for bisexual community, and that's more so because people, I know that people will listen to me sometimes more so than them, sadly. So if I can lend my voice to their cause, then I 100% will. With bisexualness, it's interesting because there was a part of it that me realized that in talking to all of you about how I was, essentially part of the problem or part of the cause of why people don't think being bi is real. When I first came out, I came out as being bisexual and not gay, and that's mainly because I really thought I was. And I actually think the reason why people don't believe in bisexuality is because they don't understand the trail of how it gets there. So, oppression towards LGBT community. You growing up, you think that I thought that I should fancy women. All of the TV programs, all of everything else told me that I should fancy women. When friends or family or parents, they would say, oh, have you got a girlfriend at school? You think that's what it is. So I had girlfriends at school, and I thought that's what relationships were like. I thought that girls fancied you, they asked you out, you didn't really want to see them that often. When they saw you, you were like, oh God. And then you're like, oh, that was the basis of what relationships were for me going through secondary school. But then there was a burning desire in me that knowing that, oh, well, I think I fancy men as well. Like I'd like to explore that part of me. And you spend years because, developing. Luckily, not everybody has to spend that amount of time anymore. But I personally spent years getting to a point where I was comfortable enough with myself to say, I actually want to reach out and start, experimenting or speaking to men in that way. And then when I did, I came out as bisexual when I actually went to uni. Then when I started dating, I was like, I'm not bisexual, I'm gay. Like I've suddenly understood this is what it feels like to fancy someone. This is what it feels like to fall in love. This is what this feels like. That wasn't what I felt in the other set with women. So then I came out as gay, but in that process, it invalidates the bisexual community in a way, because that's why it feels like a transition period. And that's because I didn't know what it was to be in a relationship at all. And luckily, with more media representation, stuff like that, we're starting to understand that from a young age. I wish I'd known at 13 or 12 that there was what it was to be gay, and I would have thought about that a lot earlier and not have to have come out like that. But I suppose I feel a bit of weight on my shoulders as well for being, you know, a lot of people that say bi now, gay later, because it's just you haven't decided, you don't really understand yet you're going to be gay. But also, again, yeah, it's just that I have friends and I respect them and I want them to have as much of a voice as I have. And I actually just don't see why. I hate it when people turn around to me and say, it's too difficult, you'll never explain it. How are you going to you know, do bisexual in 30 seconds? Because I just don't believe like anything is impossible. And so I just don't know, I just have a spur on to change it, because I don't like it when people were made to feel like I was made to feel. That's a rant.
Yeah, I just got a bit of a flag that we are timing out. So I'm full of all of your time, and you know, for you know the honest and heartfelt conversation that you all shared with us today. It's so different than, you know, just having a random panel where we have our prepared speaking points, but this was not that. This was all of you really, you know, coming with your hearts wide open. So you know, you have our gratitude and our appreciation for that. If you had one phrase to chuck in at the end, would anyone like to consider a bit of a closing?
Oh God, wait, that's not my closing statement, by the way. No, I think, well, I mean, way to throw us off. I would just say, you know, it's so cheesy. I'm really regretting saying this before I've even said it, but just be true to yourself and talk to your friends, talk to your family. Don't be ashamed. And there are lots of things out there, resources for everyone. So,
and if it's not your friends or family, it could be your chosen family. So like the word we used other. So
absolutely.
Mine would just my thought is, or leaving thought, as we say, is remember that your own experience isn't that experience, and actually all we need to do to be allies, whether that's with other people in the LGBT community or other communities, like with Black Lives Matter, is to listen and be empathetic for people's stories, rather than have a habit of saying, well, I don't think it's really like that, is it? You know, it's people have lived an experience and everyone's experience is valid. So I think we just need to remember that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo maybe what I said earlier, you know, be listening, reading, thinking, learning, acting, but also looking after yourself and just making sure that you're in the right place to be able to make sort of important decisions and drive change. Simple.
And so as a close, you know, all of you out there, you are valid, you are loved, and you are enough just as you are. So thanks everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.